staying truly informed today, well, feels like trying to drink from a fire hose, doesn't it?
It really does. Information overload.
But you've sent us this fascinating set of sources, and we're here to sort of cut through the noise, get to what really matters for you.
Exactly. It's about extracting the core insights, the actionable stuff.
And today, it seems like the core is all about different angles on health and well-being based on these materials.
Yeah, it's quite a mix, which is great. We're looking at health from lots of different perspectives.
Absolutely. We're starting with getting active, then diving into the whole face mask situation we all live through.
And then shifting to things like body image, our relationship with alcohol.
Right. And even genetics, blood types, which has a surprising cultural side, plus coronaviruses, meditation.
And finishing with something fundamental, hand washing.
It's a lot, but hopefully seeing how these different pieces connect will be insightful.
That's the idea, looking at physical activity, societal responses, genetics, culture. It all builds a richer picture of health.
Okay, let's dive in. Physical activity first. One source mentions vigorous exercise. What are we actually talking about there?
Well, think about it like this. You're breathing hard, pretty fast. Your heart rate's definitely up.
Okay.
You could probably manage short sentences, but definitely not, sing a song.
Got it. That clarifies things. And speaking of activity, there's a statistic in here from Public Health England that's, well, it's pretty startling.
Ah, yes. The one about 40 to 60-year-olds.
That's the one. It says 40% of them do less than 10 minutes of brisk walking. A month? Less than 10 minutes. In a whole month. It's quite something.
It really shows how sedentary life can become.
It does. But thankfully, one of the sources has some practical advice from Julia Bradbrick.
Oh, yeah, the TV presenter. Her tips seem quite doable.
Very down to earth. Things like walking to meetings if you can, always taking the stairs, walking with your kids.
Simple stuff, but she talks about how it incrementally adds up.
Exactly. Building it in, she calls it.
Mm-hmm.
And incrementally is the key word. It's not about huge changes overnight. Just making those small, consistent efforts part of your routine.
Right. Even just turning a slow walk, a saunter, into something a bit more brisk. Those little bits accumulate.
So it's less about becoming an elite athlete and more about just moving more often.
Precisely. And it's not just about feeling better, though that's part of it. There are real, measurable health benefits.
Like what specifically?
Well, activity, especially that more vigorous kind, it actually stimulates your body's repair systems.
Ah, okay.
Plus, the big ones. Lower risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even some cancers. It's well established.
So those small walks can really pay off long term.
Definitely. Big impact from small changes.
Right, okay. From moving our bodies to something that became unavoidable recently, face masks. Turns out they've been around for ages.
Oh, yes. Medical masks go way back. Think plagues in the Middle Ages. Cholera in the 1800s. They were used then, too.
Which leads nicely to a little quiz question from the sources.
Yeah.
When and where were face masks first widely used? Options are Vienna 1855, Chicago 1905, or London 1955. What do you think?
Widely used. Early 20th century public health focus in the U.S. I'll go with Chicago, 1905.
You got it. Chicago, 1905. Dr. Alice Hamilton saw they helped stop scarlet fever spreading among caregivers.
Interesting. So there's historical precedent.
There is. But despite that history and, everyone wearing them during the pandemic, the actual evidence on effectiveness for the general public was, well, complicated.
That's a good way to put it. Professor Robert West looked at a lot of studies, and his conclusion was that the evidence was equivocal.
Equivocal, meaning?
Meaning it wasn't really conclusive. Some studies suggested a benefit, others didn't find a significant impact, especially in community settings. It wasn't a slam dunk either way.
But there's that intuitive argument, isn't there? It just stands to reason that a barrier helps stop droplets.
Exactly. That was a strong argument. If you're coughing or sneezing, blocking the stuff you're emitting seems logical.
But there were counter-arguments, too.
Oh, definitely. A big one was the worry about a false sense of security.
Right, people thinking the mask was enough and maybe getting lax about hand washing or distancing.
Precisely. And the source also mentions mask shaming, which was an unfortunate side effect. People getting grief for wearing or not wearing one created a lot of tension.
Yeah, it became quite a heated debate. And the official advice, like from the WHO, it changed over time, didn't it?
It did evolve. Initially, it was more focused on sick people and carers. But then, as we learned more about asymptomatic spread, people emitting the virus without symptoms, the advice shifted towards broader public use, especially indoors or in crowded spaces.
So the stands to reason idea was there, but the hard evidence was equivocal. A tricky situation.
Very much so.
Okay, let's switch gears. Body image. It's always a big topic, especially with media influence. One source talks about objectification.
Yeah, basically treating a person like an object, focusing only on their appearance, ignoring everything else about them.
And historically, that's often been directed more at women in media.
Undeniably. Media has often pushed these, frankly, unrealistic beauty standards, especially for women.
Which brings up another quiz question. When did we first see a completely naked man on British TV? Was it the 40s, 50s, or 60s?
Societal norms back then. Nudity on TV. Maybe the 60s. Seems more likely.
Surprisingly, it was earlier, 1957. Apparently, it was in a documentary about a nudist colony.
Wow, okay. 1957. Earlier than I thought.
Times change. Now, the source mentions Love Island as maybe an example where objectification is more equal opportunity now. Both men and women often presented based on physique.
That's one perspective offered, yes. That the focus on idealized bodies applies to both sexes on shows like that.
But is that focus always bad? Dr. Peter Lucas, a philosopher I mentioned, suggests it could be aspirational.
He does offer that view, that seeing these superfit bodies might act as role models, encouraging people to aspire to be healthier, fitter.
Like a motivation?
Potentially, yes, the aspirational angle.
But there's a flip side, isn't there? A potentially harmful side.
Absolutely. Dr. Lucas acknowledges that too. This constant focus can fuel narcissism, excessive self-focus, and make people really self-conscious about their own bodies.
Leading to potentially detrimental or harmful behaviors.
Exactly. It can breed insecurity, unhealthy comparisons, rather than genuine motivation for well-being. So it's a double-edged sword. Might be aspirational for some, but definitely risky for others.
Very complex. Okay, let's talk about alcohol. Quitting drinking, staying dry, common goals for people.
Yes, choosing to abstain, basically.
Yeah.
You mentioned doing a dry January yourself as a resolution.
I did, yeah. Partly for health, partly, for the wallet. A conscious decision, a resolution.
Makes sense.
It got me thinking, though. Which country actually drinks the most per person? The source has 2015 WHO data. Australia, Finland, or the Czech Republic?
Strong beer culture. I'm going with the Czech Republic.
You're on fire today. Czech Republic it is. An average of 14.1 liters of pure alcohol per person back in 2015. That's a lot.
It certainly is. 14 liters. Wow.
But the benefits of taking a break, even just for a month, they seem pretty clear from the research mentioned.
They do. Dr. Richard DeVisser's study found, 62% reported sleeping better after just 1 month of sobriety.
Better sleep is a big one. And it's not just physical, is it? Catherine Gray, the author, talks about social anxiety.
Right. She wrote about her own journey to sobriety and described using alcohol as a kind of crutch in social situations to cope with that anxiety.
Relying on it to get through parties or events.
Exactly. So for her, abstaining meant finding other ways to manage that. It highlights how intertwined boozing can be with social life for some.
And experts suggest giving it a decent amount of time if you try it.
Yeah, the source mentions a recommendation of trying for 90 days. 3 months, basically, to let the new non-drinking habits really bed in and become established.
Makes sense. Takes time for habits to stick. Okay, next up. Genetics and weight. Is being naturally slim partly in our genes?
It seems increasingly likely, yes. It's definitely more complex than just calories and willpower.
This links to another quiz. What's that popular diet known for cutting carbs drastically? Mediterranean Atkins or Graham?
Oh, that's got to be the Atkins diet. Very low carb focus.
Correct, again. Now, the source uses everyday terms like tubby for overweight, skinny for thin, and mentions crash diets.
Right, those quick fix, usually unsustainable diets.
So how much does genetics actually play a role in weight?
Well, the research cited suggests around 40% of the variation in weight between people might be down to their genes.
40%. That's quite significant.
It is. It suggests some people might have a sort of genetic advantage in staying slimmer, or find it harder to lose weight, perhaps needing less food to maintain weight, or having a smaller paunch.
So it's not purely about willpower.
Professor Sadaf Farooqi argues exactly that. Understanding the genetic part can help people struggling with obesity to come to terms with their challenges.
And maybe reduce how judgmental society can be.
Hopefully, yes. Shifting the focus away from just blaming individuals for lack of willpower.
But crucially, This doesn't mean diet and exercise don't matter anymore, right?
Not at all. That's really important. The sources still stress healthy eating and getting exercise, even mentioning things like short bursts of high-intensity training. Genetics is a factor, maybe a big one for some, but lifestyle choices are still powerful.
Right, it's an influence, not destiny. Okay, let's shift to something completely different.
No.
Blood types. Apparently, they mean very different things in different places.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Here, most people barely know their blood type, maybe unless they donate blood. But in parts of Asia, it's a much bigger deal.
How so?
It can factor into, believe it or not, choosing romantic partners, job prospects sometimes, and it's strongly linked to perceived personality traits.
Wow. There's even a term in Japan, burahara, blood harassment.
Yeah, burahara. It refers to discrimination or negative treatment based on blood type, particularly if someone has a type considered less desirable.
That's wild. Okay, quiz time again. In burahara, which blood type is often seen as selfish? A, B, or O?
If it's linked to negative traits. Maybe B. Just a guess.
Correct. It's often type B. Traditional Japanese associations link type A with being perfectionists, type O with being stubborn but generous.
And type B gets labeled selfish and independent. Woe betide them, as the source says.
Exactly. Woe betide implies bad luck or negative consequences for having that type. Stark contrast to how we see it.
Absolutely. But scientifically, is there any basis for these personality links?
According to Dr. Emma Pomeroy, quoted in the source, no. She compares it to astrology popular beliefs, but no scientific backing.
So what is the scientific purpose of blood types then?
It's all about the immune system. Blood types are basically chemical markers on our red blood cells. They help our immune system tell our own cells apart from foreign invaders, pathogens, like bacteria or viruses.
So it's crucial for things like blood transfusions.
Precisely. You need compatible types so the recipient's immune system doesn't attack the donated blood. That's why type O is valuable. It's often called the universal donor.
Fascinating how culture builds on biology like that. Okay, let's tackle COVID-19. The source links it back to the earlier SARS outbreak.
Yes, both are coronaviruses. And these viruses are known to mutate, right? Change over time.
Exactly. They mutate, creating new strains or variants. COVID-19, the virus, was actually initially called SARS-CoV-2 because it's related to the original SARS virus.
Okay, related question about our defenses. What's the average number of white blood cells an adult needs per microliter of blood? 7,000, 17,000, or 70,000?
White blood cells fight infection. I'll guess the lower end, maybe 7,000.
Spot on again, around 7,000. Now, the source mentions research in China finding over 700 different coronaviruses just in bats.
700, that really highlights the potential for future outbreaks, doesn't it?
It does. Scientists like Dr. Peter Daszak stress we need to find the precursors, the early signs, and raise a red flag to prevent the next pandemic. His hypothesis involves tracking these related viruses.
Proactive surveillance seems key, understanding what's out there before it jumps to humans.
And Professor Mary Fowkes, a pathologist, she found COVID-19's effects were wider than first thought.
Yes, her work was important. While lungs, the respiratory system, were the obvious target, she found damage in other organs too, brain, blood vessels.
Really? The brain?
Yes. Clinicians were seeing patients exhibiting neurological symptoms, confusion, even seizures. It showed the virus could affect the central nervous system.
That's much more serious than just a lung infection.
It really broadened our understanding of the virus's impact. These different strains can be complex.
Okay, let's move towards something potentially more calming. Meditation. The sources look at scientific studies, often involving Buddhist monks.
Right. Moving beyond just relaxation to look at actual brain effects. Neuroscience getting involved.
And here's a question. What does the Tibetan word for meditation literally mean? To relax, to feel blissful, or to become familiar?
Meditation as practice, training. I'll go with to become familiar.
Correct. To become familiar with constructive ways of thinking, essentially. Professor Richard Davidson's work is mentioned.
Ah, yes. The Dalai Lama challenged him to study kindness and compassion scientifically using neuroscience.
And his experiments, monks focusing on compassion.
Led to these really high levels of gamma oscillations in their brains. Specific brain waves linked to higher processing, maybe that feeling of sudden flash of insight.
And these effects weren't just temporary spikes.
For the experienced monks, no, the activity stayed high. And crucially, the research showed neuroplasticity in action.
The brain changing itself.
Exactly. Meditation seems to lead to enduring, long-lasting changes in brain circuits involved in attention and emotion regulation. Even beginners showed benefits after meditating daily for a while, maybe 30 minutes or so.
That's powerful. The idea that we can actively train our brains like that.
It really is.
Well,
Shows the potential of these practices.
okay, let's wrap up with something incredibly basic yet vital. Hand washing. The source starts with a little riddle about breath,
Hey, yeah, a clever lead-in.
but it quickly gets to the point. Washing hands stops germ spreading, and it credits Ignaz Semmelweis as a pioneer.
Rightly so. The savior of mothers. His work dramatically cut deaths in maternity wards in the 1800s just by getting doctors to wash their hands. A true patron saint of hygiene.
A hero. But his story didn't end well, did it? Final quiz question. What happened to Semmelweis? Nobel Prize? Ended up in a mental hospital? Or started a soap company?
Oh, this is the tragic part of his story. His ideas weren't accepted at the time. He ended up in a hospital for the mentally ill.
So sad, but true. It highlights how hard it can be to get scientific messages across. Val Curtis, the hygiene expert, mentioned.
Yes, she points out how that simple message, wash your hands, eventually jumped out as key, but it took time. Communicating scientific evidence effectively is hard.
She mentions a 2003 study showing hand washing could save millions of lives. That really made it a global issue.
And her point is important. Present the scientific evidence positively, make it actionable, rather than just, screaming and shouting about it.
Well, this has been quite the journey. From vigorous exercise and masturbates,
See body image, alcohol, genes, blood types.
got coronavirus origins, meditation's effects on the brain, and right back to basic hand hygiene. We've covered a lot of ground.
It really shows how interconnected everything is when it comes to health, doesn't it? Biology, behavior, society, culture.
Absolutely. What really stood out for me was maybe the practical simplicity of Julia Bradbury's walking tips, and also that idea of neuroplasticity from meditation, actually changing our brains. Hopefully you, listening, have found your own key takeaways.
Yeah, the aim is always to connect these insights back to your own experience.
So, thinking about all these links, genetics, lifestyle, social pressures, even things like blood type beliefs in some places, maybe a final thought for you to ponder. What's one small, achievable change you could make, starting today, that might positively ripple through your own well-being? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.